everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing, and very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show, or it's a Rejoinder episode, like this one is. We have Kat Giordano back, and we're talking about her new book, Tell Me You've Earned It, out through Gobpile Press. Kat Giordano was born in Philadelphia, and it's been downhill ever since. She's the author of one other poetry collection, The Poet Confronts Bukowski's Ghost, from Philosophical Idiot in 2018, and one novel, The Fountain, 30 West Publishing House, in 2020. Kat is also the author of several embarrassing Twitter meltdowns. She currently lives in Lehigh Valley, where she spends most of her time playing video games and doting on her dog. When she isn't being an insufferable emotional exhibitionist, she can be pretty cool. And I can attest to that. If you want to help out the show, Writing the Rapids, which is this show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. Patreon.com/NoisemakerJoe is a good place to go for recurring donations. For a one-time donation, paypal.me/NoisemakerJoe. Or you can buy my book. It's called Tired. It's on Amazon. Or you can give this show the appropriate number of stars wherever you're listening to it, if that's a feature of wherever you're listening to it. Tweet about the show, say nice things about me in public. It all helps. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Kat. First of all, is it preface or is it preface? I think it's preface if it's a noun, and preface if it's a verb, but I'm going to be saying it a lot, so let's get on board.
I've been saying preface, so okay. I think preface is fine. And then if we're both wrong, at least we'll both be wrong in the same way.
Sure. Great. Let me know in the comments below.
Or don't.
That's not really a podcast thing anyway. I don't know. Follow me on Twitter. No, tell you what. No. Subscribe to the Patreon, and then send a message through the Patreon. $10 a month only, and I'll read it 6 months from now, so I make sure that you're here to stay. So I think that the preface was very useful in informing me how to read the book. Tell Me You've Earned It. Because so I read it immediately after I got it, which was maybe like a week or so before I read the book. So I kind of had that to ruminate in my brain. And then I read it, and then I reread the preface after I read all of the poems to sort of like recenter the experience of the book, which is useful. It kind of made it like a concept album for me. I think organizing poetry collections is something that's like way beyond my pay grade when it comes to like how people do it. So I liked that it centered the book in a time and a place and a mood.
Yeah, I'm happy you said that. Putting the preface in was kind of like a last minute decision, and a little bit came out of insecurity over what people would take from the book, which I don't, once something's out of your hands, as an artist or whatever, it's like you don't really have control over what people take from it or what they decide to perceive about you or about your work. But for this, it just seemed it was very important to me to put it in some kind of context, especially because I talk a lot about being like a confessional poet, and I didn't want people to be like, oh, this thing you just put out in the year of our Lord 2023 is like shit that you did in 2022, and like this is who and what you are, and there's no reflection going on. And so yeah, I'm happy that it kind of landed in that way, it sounds like.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, having the events of the book removed, or the inspirations removed 5 years or whatever, is I think useful, kind of in all those ways, right? So nobody's like, what were you doing during the pandemic? Like, seriously?
Oh, well, yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that, but yeah, that too.
I mean, the rest of us were baking bread, but holy cow. And I think, too, that I have a hard time how do I say it so that it doesn't sound like a dig or something? I have a hard time with confessional poetry because when I read something, I imagine how I would write something like it, or like what I would feel, where I'd have to be, how I would do it. And with stuff like that, like this book, I can imagine writing something like it and then like leaving it in a notebook forever. And like clearly people like stuff like that. I mean, I read the book and I liked it. Like it's a good book of poetry. So like there is worth and there's value to it, but you know, there's certain things that even Mr. Experimental over here is just like, oh, that makes me feel too uncomfortable to put out, you know. And I think kind of setting it aside for a while and letting it cook in the sands of time is good.
Yeah, I'm glad I did that. Not to get too into the like, I don't know. I think we're going to at some point, but like the personal, lore behind the book or whatever. It was very much like I wrote it while I was waiting for my first book to be published. So there's also like the time issue of like I don't really write like this anymore. At least in my head, like in my head, I've evolved so much, and so it's like it's definitely like I'm putting it out as like a concept kind of project where like it isn't about me anymore. So it's not even the way that I would write these things now. So like it doesn't feel like I'm really like letting a lot of stuff go.
Yeah.
Because it's not me at this point. It's like a construction, or it's like my idea of myself at a certain time.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what all confessional writing is. Like it's all a construct anyway. Like maybe this is because I'm just super online, but like I don't really feel like authenticity is like as possible as like we wish it was, or we want it to be. And I don't know, I think this is just like playing with that to more of an extreme, or like more of in a concrete way where like obviously it's not myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I don't know. I was thinking a lot of like Cavan's writing, or like Sam Pink, or Noah Cicero, who you did publish, and that sort of thing. And like, I don't know, just sort of fitting into that sort of realm of writing. It's almost for me as like the most vanilla person I know in real life, to like, it's almost like a vacation, to be like, if I had my first beer at 16, like, let's read some poems about, what that would be like. Which maybe is like not a great way to engage with people's like most
makes you feel better. I had my first beer at 18, so it's okay. I'm not
good. That's still, well, that's still legal, but that's fine on a European standard, I suppose.
Exactly. I mean, I am / was sheltered as well. I just again, it's a construction. It's like
yeah, for sure. I think the authenticity thing is good to bring up, because I guess I haven't really like thought about it enough to put it into words. But like, yeah, I think I'm okay with like us not trying to do that anymore. I mean, so much of writer Twitter that I see right now feels like the DIY punk scene to me, of like people just saying, whose money paid for that book, Jimmy? Was it your dad's? Where it's just like, no, that's, I understand the economics of it all and the politics of it all, but like, is the book good?
Yeah, I feel you. There's also like, I guess, not to just like make this whole thing about other writers, but like I feel like I felt this kind of like obligation when you're writing confessional stuff about like being shitty, or like doing shit in your life that was like not great. It feels like I don't know. I don't want to become that person who's like, oh, like I did all of this like terrible stuff and it like turned into a good book. It's like, no, I did all this terrible stuff and I made some bad decisions or whatever and I had a mental breakdown, blah, 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 blah. And then I waited several years, decided how I felt about it, made some kind of peace with it, and then put out a book about it. Because to me, that separation is kind of important. Like, I don't want to be the person who, and I think we talked about this like last time I was on.
We very
like,
well probably did. Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be like, I have to be self-destructive to make art, you know? And if I had put this out in 2018, 2019, that's what it would have been. It would have been me being like, oh my God, I'm like so mentally ill and I like did all this shit. And here is the direct product of that.
Yeah.
With no like, I don't know, with no thought given to like it as a piece of art, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I like travel writing an awful lot. And I think maybe that's like one of the few good examples of like method writing, right? Like go on a road trip, meet some strangers, have a bar fight maybe, and then write a book. And like otherwise, you know, take care of yourself, drink some water, stretch, tell your mom you love her, that sort of thing. Yeah, for sure. I want to, I was very terrified this book was going to be like only horny, because it's sort of, that's like part of the selling point is that there's some horny poems. And there are, and I think I saw you tweet about like the MRI picture poem before, because it was like already in my brain when I read it, and I don't think it would have been there otherwise. But that's a fantastic image anyway. But I remember when we talked last time, we were talking about the fountain, and I was like very uncomfortably talking about the blowjob scene, and so I was just worried that it was going to be a half hour of me sort of like trying to talk about it and not feeling comfortable asking a question without coming off as like any sort of bad.
A, do not worry about that. And B, that's really funny.
Because you know, like from my perspective, it's like I'm not equipped with like, you know, the theory with like the knowledge of like how to talk about these things. You know, it's like if I had some sort of like, I don't know, if I had, I don't know, if you had written a book about like radical feminism, right? Like a theory text, I would have come in with like a bunch of questions that I knew I had to ask very correctly to not be like the guy who's, wait, what do you mean? You want to vote? Like, I don't understand.
You don't want to be the guy who's in the DMs like, hey, I read your book, so like how much of that really happened?
Right. Tell me in detail.
Yeah, no, it's like, I've gone that guy, you know, but it's, you know, at the same time, I decided to put this book out and I wrote it. Like I'm not super squeamish, so. Yeah.
I am interested about that because you did, I assume that's you running the Tell Me You've Earned It account.
Yeah.
Posting lines, which is, I think, a good marketing idea for a poet. I think that's just a good thing to do. But you've alluded to that experience being potentially harrowing. What with people? What are give me some of the greatest hits.
Well, what do you mean, like lines?
Yeah, like what are people in the DMs of that Twitter account saying? Like off the top of your head, what are some of the best ones?
Oh, I didn't get any DMs or anything.
Oh no.
To that account, but just I mean when even like not even this book, but like even when The Fountain came out and stuff, I've had people DM me being like, yeah, so I read your book, like, hey, was that like a true story? It's like, don't ask me that, guy who like sees yourself as the guy in the book. It's like, you know. But it is funny. Yeah. Or like I did have like people DMing me being like, oh, have I earned it? Like clearly not. I should just be like, yeah, you have to read the book first. It's like $14.99 or whatever.
It's not gonna take you all week. I mean, maybe it might take some of you guys all week, but yeah, okay, that's fine. I was hoping that you'd have had some,
No,
I don't know,
unfortunately,
like
I don't have
response
any.
poems in the DMs or
No,
something.
that would be amazing, but unfortunately not. I guess this is now the open invitation to.
Do not bother Kat.
You can bother me. Just make it interesting and don't expect a response. That's.
Uh, I really enjoyed the list poems in here. There's a list of things I desperately need to hear from others, but out of necessity have chosen instead to say to myself. And then a few pages later,
Series of
series of
confessions.
confessions.
Yeah.
I enjoyed those an awful lot.
Thank you.
I don't really have a question behind those. I just think that those are very good poems. So
Thanks.
I like that that bit. I also thought April Penis was very funny.
Thank you. That's my favorite one.
Is it?
I
Okay.
think it's one of two that I'm most proud of. I think that still hold up as like good pieces of writing that I'm still proud of and stand on their own. It's that one and the frantic efforts to avoid real and imagined abandonment. I really love that poem. I feel like that's like, I don't know. I just feel like that's one of the best things I've ever written. I'm very proud of that one.
Yes. So we've talked about it a whole bunch, that you wrote all these poems and then waited a while. And it doesn't really seem at this point like it was like a super conscious effort to like, I'm going to put this in a box for 5 years and then take it out and see. But like, but now in 2023, probably 2022, what made you, like, how did you know you were ready?
Some of it is like I had just kind of fully moved on from being preoccupied with I'll never fully move on from being preoccupied with like the whole situation in the book. The preface says this, like I ended a long-term relationship, I lost all my friends, I had to move, and it was horrible, and I felt like it took me such a long time to like recover from that, to a point where like there had been things that happened in my life that weren't that, or like that were separate from that, to the point where like I had actually moved on, and it wasn't just going to be me like finding a new way to obsess over what happened. But I never really had a moment of like, oh, I'm ready to put this out. It was like I have this whole ass like manuscript like sitting in my hard drive, and like every few months I like look at it and I move two things around, and I just happened to see that like Godpile was asking, or like they were like asking for manuscripts, and I think actually like Bram like DM'd me and asked me if I had anything, and I was like, you know what? I was like, I do have something actually, and I didn't have high hopes that anyone would like it, because I wasn't even sure at the time if I liked it, or it was just kind of like something that I had to make when I made it. And yeah, like the rest is history, I guess.
Okay, I like that too. That is nice that it was kind of just serendipitous. Yeah, that just like it just happens, because I feel kind of like that's how a lot of like the grieving process is, where like one day you just kind of wake up and you're like, oh, that thing that used to hurt doesn't hurt anymore. Okay, I guess I'm done.
Yeah,
I'll enjoy a taco for lunch and it will be great.
right. Yeah, it's interesting too, because like around the time, it was like this book came out January, but like in December, like one of the many people that I had cut ties with over events in the book that I had been imagining for years and years, like maybe we'll reconnect one day and they'll talk to me and I'll like be able to say my piece and everything will be good. Like as I'm putting the book out and finally like making my peace with it, this person finally reaches out to me and we were able to clear the air, and it was like, oh my god, like this like whole thing is like tying up so neatly with a bow. Like I could not have imagined that. So that was just like it was really cool.
Almost enough to make me believe in manifesting.
Yeah, right. Almost. And I feel I don't know, I feel as much as like I don't really believe in like the writing as therapy thing, I do feel like putting this out and like having it be something that sits in somebody else's house and not in my house. I mean, it is in my house, but like helps me like move on a little bit more. And And that's not like what the intent was, and that's a little cheesy, but I definitely feel like that's the, like an unintended side effect that I appreciate.
Yeah. Um, that reminds me, I think this will be the second episode in a row I've mentioned the band the Mars Volta. But they had an album that they were making around the same time they were like messing around with a Ouija board they had bought in Jerusalem or something like that. And basically it cursed the album. And so they like made the album, like the vinyl cover, whatever, like a Ouija board. And then when they sold that off to everybody, they're like, okay, now it's your problem. It's all your problem. That's what that makes me think of.
Yeah, similar vibe for sure.
One of the things that strikes me about a lot of these poems is that desperate, those like first first bits of love that you get when you like find a new person, that feel like, I don't know, they're like so intense and frightening, and like intoxicating, that like really comes through well with these. I think the fact that you like didn't go through and edit as an adult later made it so that a lot of that is kept in there, which is really nice because, you can turn to this book and feel that if you need to feel it without,
Yeah.
leaving your wife or whatever. And I think too, this book also highlights the addictiveness of being sad. I don't think we talk enough, people in general, about like how kind of addictive being bummed out is.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it feels good to be tortured. Like that's a soundbite. It feels good to be tortured and to sit in your apartment and be like, I'm a piece of shit and I'm hurting everyone and I'm so hurt and blah blah blah. Like it feels good. And I'm happy I was able to sublimate it a little bit.
Yeah.
At the time too.
And one of the things, and maybe it's just because I'm in such a stable point in my life currently, but it didn't feel contagious, because sometimes you'll read a book and it'll really mess you up for a couple of days. Like it'll scratch and itch too hard, and you'll be like, yeah, I'm gonna start drinking again or something, and it'll really, go too far, and I feel like you get to be in a unique position, to sort of like see all those happy accidents that come about from like what is the writing going to do.
Yeah, it's funny because I have like a couple books in mind when you said that, and one of them is but right before I decided to put this book out, I read Elizabeth Ellen's Persona. I don't know if you've ever read that.
I haven't.
Okay, well the book is very it's like an autofiction sort of thing, but it's also like about her writing a novel about being obsessed with someone, and it's very like raw and contagious in that way. And I think that's one of the reasons, like the things that made me feel like, okay, the whole conversation around her, whatever, being what it is. I read that book and I was like, oh, like if she can put out that and make me feel like this, then I can put out my thing that's just kind of like about being obsessed with someone. And like, yeah, and I am surprised that the response to it has been like so like people have really like resonated with it, because I was afraid it was so insular and so much like a navel gazing thing on my part that maybe that doesn't like connect to other people. But I was totally wrong about that, and I've been very handsomely rewarded for for showing whole, as they say. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that how do I say it? Like, it feels very much like going back and reading through old journals, but because they're not mine, I get to have the safe distance, right? I don't have to reignite like the specific feelings. But like, I know what it feels like to do something that, like, even in the moment you don't feel good about doing, and I know what it feels like to be infatuated with someone desperately, and I know what it feels like to be unsure about the future. Like, so there we go. Like, and I guess that's just like, that's what poetry is supposed to do. It's supposed to make you feel good feelings, or you know, feel strong feelings, and reinvestigate feelings, and so it did it.
I'm glad. And there's, I don't know how much time we have, but there's the whole personality disorder of it all, which has also been interesting to me because I know that the extent to which I feel some of these things is probably not the same as the extent to which like people reading feel those things, or that I could ever really put into words. And at the same time, it's pretty clear that like, being obsessed with someone and doing things you regret for, to those ends and whatever, that's not a pathological experience. That's pretty universal. And that was also like kind of important for me to like not just put this out and then beat myself up over like, look at all this crazy like borderline shit that I did in not 2023, in whatever, like 2018. Like, it's not really that.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't have to be that. So that was cool.
Yeah, it's certainly a universal thing. I'm not familiar with the symptoms. Like,
would you like a quick primer?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So again, I'm not a PhD or whatever, but I am a BP. Anyway, so it's basically like characterized by you fear abandonment, so you kind of see it in everything. Like, you're always thinking that the person or whatever is going to leave you, and it causes like intense emotional reactions. Self-harm in some cases. Basically, you're just kind of like a walking open wound, anticipating abandonment and seeking reassurance to the point that you kind of bring it on yourself. And it's very difficult to climb out of that hole. And obviously, it's pretty stigmatized. So it's something that I'm still kind of like reckoning with in terms of like how much I want to identify myself with something that I'm trying to improve, But yeah, at the time that all this stuff was happening, I was like full blown, not really any self-awareness, what I was doing, why I was doing it. And so like idealizing a person and getting so swept away that like nothing else matters to you, and then like, being like masturbatorily sad about it for months and months on end. Like, yeah, that's the experience. And that poem, the like frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, that's one of the symptoms word for word in the DSM-5.
Oh, interesting.
For BPD. So that's why it's called that.
Okay. That sounds rough. That doesn't sound fun.
I don't really struggle that hard anymore most of the time. Putting words and labels to it has made it easier for me to separate those things from myself. Like, your thoughts are not you, so I'm not totally in the throes. Obviously I have my moments and stuff, but yeah, it's cool to know that the things I associate with like just being having such like a stigmatized thing that I have to carry around are not unique, or as unique to me as like I think they are, or sometimes want to think they are. So,
yeah.
It's not a lot for me to put this out, actually.
Good. I think that it seems like a lot of mental illness stuff is kind of like that one way or the other thing where it's like, well, everybody's disappointed when they wake up in the morning, right? And it's like, no, dude, that's unhealthy. Like, please find help. Or like, oh, I'm the only one who feels this way. Whereas it seems like, at least for a lot of the ones that are currently being worked on in the culture to destigmatize, it seems like it's a lot of like too much of one thing or not enough of the other thing, and working to balance out. But like, yeah, it's naming something and kind of understanding what it does is useful, because you can, if you're aware of your thoughts as they're happening, then you can point to it and be like, aha, I see you, I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Something I didn't understand what this was for a long time, but like when I was, a teenager and I went through a breakup for the first time, and I was told that I was like very clingy and codependent or whatever, and then I went back and I was like listening to music and stuff, and I was like, this is bullshit. Every love song talks about feeling these things, and they're allowed to have these feelings, and I don't get why they're having these feelings and then I have them and it's wrong. And it took me so long to understand that it's not that it's wrong, it's that like they're describing like this very acute, like dramatized version of an experience that like I have, and it like totally consumes me and I project it onto other people. There's a very like, it's like you have to kind of thread the needle and be like, yeah, like I'm having a universal human emotion, but the way that these work for me, if I'm not like actively working on myself, is like destructive. And yeah, and putting the book out is the same way. Like here's a dramatization, I guess you might think of certain feelings, but in the moment, that's like, I actually do like feel like a dog, that is like begging to be let into your house. Like it's very acute.